Welcome to the Hembury Books Podcast. Today we have a special episode on genre fiction, and it's the first time I've ever had two guests. I have Jack Roney and Harry Colfer. Jack is a retired police officer and now crime fiction writer and podcaster. His 4 novels are published by Hawkeye Publishing. The Angels Wept was shortlisted in the Wattpad Awards, while The Ghost Train and The Scarlet Moon was runner-up in Hawkeye's Manuscript Development Prize. As co-host of the Genre Fiction Podcast, Jack interviews fellow authors and industry experts. Harry Colfer is the pseudonym of a critical care paramedic who lives and works in Brisbane. He uses his wealth of experience to write fictional but realistic medical stories that are always served up with a healthy dose of dark Ambo humour. I did not know that was a thing, but it makes sense. To date, he has published 4 novels in his Tetralogy of Jono series, along with winning several short story awards for his prequel, Ambo Tales, and the Frontline collection. He's now taking a sabbatical from his day job, and like Jono, he's decided to live on a yacht for a while. Thanks for joining us, Harry and Jack.
Thank you.
G'day, Jess. Great to have. I'm so used to saying great to have you. Now we're having to do it from the other side of the table.
Yeah, I know. I might forget too because you hosted me, which was really fun. And then I was like, "Please come on my podcast." So
it's great for you to have us.
It is
on
great.
The show.
It is great. And you and I have been in touch like for probably 4 or 5 years. I was thinking. Because I was sending you some travel stories for a while, sort of stories about writing a travel book.
Yeah, a few years ago, I created this platform to try and help authors, share and network, and we, helping each other by promoting each other's books and that sort of thing. So that was a great opportunity to start networking. I think that was how you and I were first in contact.
Yeah, but second time face-to-face contact, virtual face-to-face.
Yes.
So you are both experts in genre fiction. Jack, could you please kick off by telling viewers what it is?
Well, can I just say, first disclaimer, Harry and I are not experts at anything. We most of what we get through is through bluff and, that sort of thing.
Bluff and bluster.
Yeah, when we come up with there was ourselves and another colleague, Bryn Smith. The 3 of us came together and said, let's have a crack at doing a podcast. What should we call it? And then we all write different forms of genre fiction, so we thought genre fiction, and so we decided to keep our kind of audience base. Is our mandate is to talk about all things genre fiction, and that's kind of how it came about. So we're not experts, but we do talk to industry experts, and I think we probably learn a fair bit. Through talking to those people. Look, I mean, you could probably Google the term genre fiction and you're going to get a whole bunch of different answers if you were to Google it. But, it's basically, my understanding is a genre is a specific category of fiction, whether it be science fiction, fantasy, crime. But even within crime, there's so many different subgenres. Even within fantasy, there's now magical realism and all these other subgenres. And what else have we got? Hardball detectives, your historical, your mysteries, sci-fi. So all these kind of categories which have been sort of designed so people can recognize one form of writing from another. But I'm sure we'll talk about it as we go on. We're starting to see a lot more crossovers between genre, and it's not so much clear cut anymore.
Yeah, the hybrid genre is. Harry, how many genres do you think there would be at a guess? And could you tell us about some of the main ones?
Well, I you gave us some of these questions in advance, and so I spent a lot of time on the internet researching this, smashing the way through Google and stuff like that, and I came up with 467 and a half genres. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. At the end of the day, genres are being invented on a daily basis, so it's a bit sort of difficult to actually pin a number down as to how many genres there are. And of course, each genre then has its subgenres, and it just becomes, this sort of amorphous thing. So it's like how many species are in the world, they're being discovered all the time. So it's going to be a bit difficult to pin it down to a specific number. But obviously, the biggies are the sort of romance, crime, science fiction, fantasy. Any one of the
horror is another one I think of.
Horror, yes.
Yeah, military, historical.
Yeah, it's for me. It's really difficult to I'm sort of pin down one genre for a book. It'll I think the real reason for this is that it helps in bookshelves and knowing where to put the book in a shop, in a bricks and mortar shop, because they've got limited shelves, and if they wanted to go and put ones all over the place, then it would be a bit difficult. And so by making it having these sort of categories, then it makes it easier to sort of stick the books in together. But in reality, every romance is going to have pure, some sort of action or some sort of suspense or something, that adds to, that borrows from another genre. So they're often going to be, or I think it'd be very difficult to make a pure genre, for one genre.
Yeah, well, it's the same with nonfiction. I remember I went to Berkeleau Books and I'd placed the books there on consignment, and then when I went back to see if they'd sold, that one of my books were in Australian, and I was like, it's called Our Home in Myanmar. And she was like, no, but you're an Australian writer. And I was like, but then kind of wouldn't almost all the books be?
Yeah.
It's a flawed kind of, it's to aid the reader though, isn't it? So readers can find what they love.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Are there any kind of really hot genres at the moment that are emerging and people are, they're creating literary trends or anything?
Well, one that it's just an observation. I've only just come back from visiting family up at Airlie Beach, and there's a beautiful little bookshop up there, book boutique, beachside book boutique at Airlie Beach. It's a great little bookshop.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, and I was just talking to the book owner there. She supports a lot of local authors, and my books are on sale at her shop. And I was just having a chat to her, and she was telling me about even my wife and my daughter, my adult daughter, were talking about this author, Rebecca Yarros. It's a series called the Empyrean series, and the bookshop owner was telling me they're absolutely, and these are brand new ones. It's a secondhand bookstore, but she still brings in brand new books to sell as well, and they're absolutely flying off the shelves. So it's a fantasy series based on dragons. So it's just kind of interesting how all of a sudden, whether it be series about the Harry Potter type wizard academies, or dystopian stories, or vampires, or whatever is the Maze Runner, all these these stories that become hits, and they start to set the trends. But apparently this one, so if you've, I think the one that's just been released is called The Onyx, but it's the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros, and it's about dragons. So it's a sort of fantasy medieval dragon type story, and apparently it's going great guns. It's bestseller all over the world. Books are flying off the shelves. So you just don't know what's going to be the next trend.
You do not know. No. So you have to write what you love.
Yeah.
Harry, what do you think about an author? Sometimes authors bristle at the idea of being within a genre, and they're like, no, my book is different. It spans so many different things. It couldn't possibly be like put in that box. What would you say to them, especially marketing this new book?
Probably talking to me, because I didn't know what genre I was writing in with my short story series, because basically I think they're humorous, but they're about paramedics. And so I just invented my own genre for it and called them paramedic procedurals. And so that sort of worked. But the problem then comes is, how do you market them? And if you've got any clues, that'd be really useful, because I probably should have stuck to a genre and then written for that genre, but I didn't. And they're popular and they're funny. So that's sort of like, I can put them in the humorous ones, and I can put them in the categories within Amazon for sort of medical and humor and short stories. And that's where I sort of pitch them. But if you don't think about where you're going to sell your book, then you're going to have problems in the future when you finally write that book.
You will. Does Amazon have a black humor category, or is that too new?
Yes, there is a dark humor one, which it does get ticked on.
Yeah.
Within humor, it's dark humor. Yeah, as a subcategory.
Jack, what about your books?
My Detective Jared O'Connor series are probably more traditional detective crime, police procedurals. Given my police background, I kind of wrote what I knew. And but I think the point of difference for my stories is I wanted to write an authentic story from the eyes of, or from the point of view of a real life detective. I was a detective for 14 years. And when I read a lot of crime, particularly Australian crime, I think authors who have not worked in law enforcement, have never had any direct involvement, are just writing what they think is correct based on what they've read or seen on American TV and Australian TV and other books. So many procedural things. And Harry and I have talked about this sort of stuff a lot in our podcast. I wanted to kind of set the record straight and tell a true, authentic account of what it's like to be a detective in a regional town. And the crimes that occur in my stories are based on homicide investigations that I was involved in and characters I'd met along the way, fictionalized. But I was certainly inspired by real events. So for me, I even though I say, yes, my books are a traditional crime, detective, police procedural, but they've also got that authenticity as well.
Yeah, being really realistic. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, when we first started the podcast, the Genre Fiction podcast, one of the taglines we were originally playing with was righting the wrongs, which was writing spelt with a W. And one of the things we're focusing on is the things that really sort of annoyed us about how people get things wrong. And that's one of the sort of, because we had a paramedic, a detective and an army guy, the three of us had our own sort of specialties that we could draw on and say, Bryn would talk a lot about what action sort of stories get wrong about guns and explosives and stuff like that, and obviously I would do the emergency scenes, and Jack would be doing stuff to do with policing. And so that was why we actually started, and because we all wanted to get things right.
I can like if I see a TV show or a movie and there's a journalist in it, I'm like, it is not like that. You have to file a lot more stories. You don't just get to like swan around investigating something, Jack, for like 3 months and then you're going to publish it. Like it's more like, the churn.
Yes. Yeah. And incidentally, I worked for the police media unit for a number of years and worked a lot with journalists who were seeking information from the police about crime stories. And you had your crime reporters, and they were just pumping through story after story, and they were under deadlines and all the stuff I'm sure you know. So, I think regardless of what professional background you come from, and I think a lot of authors come from different professional backgrounds, psychologists, lawyers, teachers, journalists, paramedics, police, military, whatever. And that really does inspire stories. And I think when you're, as a reader, you see an author who has got a professional background in what kind of the fiction they're writing, you kind of think, well, that gives it a bit of a stamp of approval that it's probably more likely to be more authentic and accurate in the way certain things are described.
Yeah, unless you're writing about dragons.
Well, exactly. And it's
I don't knock it,
It's an interesting thing, because when you look at author bios, particularly say authors who are writing these fantastic sci-fi or fantasy stories, no one cares about what their professional background is. And a lot of authors, I think it's just an observation I've seen as well, where in my bio I talk about I was an ex-detective and it's inspired my crime writing because it's relevant. But if you're writing about dragons or sci-fi, it doesn't, whether you're a dentist or a teacher, or it's not relevant. So they talk about other aspects of their life that gives credibility to them as an author. It's interesting.
And just going back to hybrid memoirs, are there any really kind of wacky combinations that you're seeing at the moment? Like, I can't think, but the pairing of two unlikely kind of genres.
Well, there's one I can think of.
Go on.
There's the romantasy. I've heard that one dropped a few times. So romance, these fantasy books have been very, very successful. So my daughter, she's 27, she's a school teacher, and she loves reading. She's churning through, hasn't read any of my books, mind you, but she loves reading these fantasy books. And these are big, thick books, and they're in series like the,
There's 12 of them.
These massive fantasy series. But they've got an element of romance, and I think we're starting to see an amalgamation of genres.
Amazing. I mean, I think self-publishing lends itself to creativity and being very ambitious, experimental. and true to your own creativity, which I think is really cool. I'm pretty sure that the indies are leading the way when it comes to new genres and exploring different ways of telling stories.
Mainly due to the fact that traditional publishers want to know where their book's going to be put. So they're thinking about bottom line rather than actually writing the story. They have to sell the thing at the end of the day, and so that's important.
Yeah. Which is it's a legitimate consideration, but if you're writing books, you want to have the freedom to pursue the storylines that you love and the settings that you want to explore. Why is it important for an author to understand the genre that they're writing in? Who would like to answer that?
You go.
Jack.
I thought you'd have heaps. I thought, Carrie, you'd have heaps to say on this.
Go for it.
Maybe you both need to answer then.
Can you rephrase the question? Sorry, can you
why is it important for an author to understand and be familiar with the genre that they're writing in?
I think at least read, it's the old cliche, write what you know, and just, I would say to any writer, just write what you want to write to start with. Don't be too consumed by what genre is this going to be. Just write the bloody thing. Write what's in your heart. And that's a really good place to start. I'm in the process of writing a new manuscript at the moment. I've hit that 30,000 word hump and I've just kind of stalled.
The saggy middle.
Yeah, I'm pushing through it because I knew at the beginning I wanted to write a pretty traditional crime story, police officer in a rural town, and I already set my parameters and I'm writing to those parameters, but I've kind of hit a bit of a wall, so I've just taken a bit of a break from it. I would just say to anyone, like Harry was saying, when he started writing stories based on his own experiences and probably was thinking, well, I don't know where this is going to fit in terms of genre, but he wrote it anyway, and you can kind of sort that stuff out later. And because we know there's so many crossovers between genres, I just think, it is useful because we might talk later about, different tropes and reader expectations. So if you are going to pitch your book as a particular, what's something we learned recently, Harry, difference between romance and love stories. I think love stories have to have a happy ending, whereas romance can have elements of tragedy.
Romance needs to have a happy ending. I think that's the one, isn't it?
That's interesting, regardless of...
Oh, I think you're right. So Romeo and Juliet would be a love story, even though they both died. It's a love story. It's got tragedy.
It's not a romance.
A romance has to have a happy ending. So that's a rule. If you're going to pitch your book as a romance, it has to. They have to find love, and there has to be a happy ending at the end. So I think it's useful to know. And we only learned this from talking to a romance expert on one of our episodes. So I think, yes, it is. To answer your question, it is useful to know, to at least understand the parameters of what is it that you're writing. So you can be thinking, as you're writing, what's the end product? I always, what keeps me going is visualizing the end product. So when I'm aiming for an 90,000 word manuscript and I'm at the 30,000 word mark and I'm stuck, I keep telling myself, what's this thing going to look like? And you start already mentally picturing, what's the cover? Who's my target audience? Who's going to be wanting to read this? How am I going to market this? How am I going to pitch it to agents and publishers and write a synopsis and an elevator pitch? So I think you need to have an understanding of what your story is about and where it fits in terms of genres, or if there is a crossover. So for all those reasons, and maybe we might delve into each of those in a bit more detail, but I think it's definitely useful for you to understand. And if you're not sure, go back to what you enjoy reading. I always say I was very much influenced by James Patterson style crime novels. I'd go back when I started writing, I'd go back and just really analyze what is it that he does that makes this work. It starts with an action scene. The chapters are short, sharp, punchy. The story pushes on. It's not literary. There's not too much convoluted prose. It's fast paced. There's action, and there's a big climax and confrontation at the end. So these are all the key elements of a particular type of genre. So just understand what are those key elements that if you're trying to replicate a particular style of book, there are no rules. The first rule is there are no rules, but I think it is useful to get an understanding of the basic parameters.
Sure.
I think that's helped by doing your own reading. If you And generally, people who are writing a book will write what they enjoy reading, and so effectively they're writing a book for themselves. And so that always helps. If you are well versed in reading about what is sort of expected within a book, of that particular genre, then you've got the experience because you've been reading them for years probably, and have got some idea of what is expected to happen. If you can't write a murder mystery without a murder, there has to have somebody die in it, otherwise you've missed the point of the genre. And obviously there has to be those mystery elements. You've got to keep the reader guessing, because if they work out who it is in the first chapter, then it's all a bit sort of, well, this isn't a mystery, it's a thriller, but it's not a mystery, and then you can't sell it as a mystery because it just doesn't have that element, although a lot of people do. And
yeah, they do.
they get away with it.
2-star Amazon reviews, so you do it at your peril, don't you?
Yes. Your readership will tell you if you've got it wrong, then that's a problem.
Because readers are as passionate about genres and discussing genres and finding the latest in their favorite genre as authors are.
Yeah. Reader expectation and meeting those expectations is very important.
I'd love to hear more about that and tropes.
Well, I know myself that if there's a particular style of book, and this might lead into the conversation around cover design, that's the first thing. People will judge a book by its cover, and that's what stands out, whether it's an ebook or a physical book on a bookshelf. They will see the cover, the texture, the look and feel, and the fonts, the font colors, size, styles, the imagery that you see on that cover should fit certain conforms. We had Dr. Kate Cuthbert on our show, and she did a thesis of her PhD on the evolution of book covers, and she really delved into this. And that was a really interesting episode where she talked about this, talking about how the covers have evolved and based on how readers can visually look at a cover and tell you exactly this is a particular style of book, whether it's a cozy mystery or a country romance or a women's contemporary fiction or a horror or a thriller or crime, military, espionage, the legal thriller, whatever. They've all got their own look and feel. So you've got to kind of look at what are the successful authors, the big names out there, what do their covers look like? Because they've got professional marketing people that will design the covers to suit that genre because they know the readers expect. If I pick up a James Patterson book, I know I'm going to expect certain tropes as in certain things will happen, and certain rules, and it's going to conform to a certain sort of formula, I guess. So I think if you're going to pitch your book as a particular genre, you really do need to make sure that you do conform to what the reader expects from that. Because if they pick up what they think is going to be a James Patterson exciting crime, and then it turns out to be a literary, slow-paced family drama, for example, they're going to say, well, this isn't what I expected, and then they might stop reading.
And give you that 2-star review.
Yeah, which no one wants. What about tropes? They are sort of, it's not a positive term, but they're necessary in many cases, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we did a podcast on tropes, and it is a bit of a subject that confuses me a bit. But at the end of the day, all of the genres will tend to have tropes associated with them. That the bad guy gets killed at the end, and there's all of these sort of things that are part of the formula to create the genre. And although it sort of seems as if it's a bad thing, generally we rely on the tropes to actually push the plot along. And it's not in reality, it isn't a bad thing. It's just a sort of thing that people are expecting to read if they're going to read a murder mystery or something like that.
So can you give an example of a fairly common trope, just so that viewers understand what can be a confusing thing?
Don't ask me. Get Jack to do that one.
one that kind of jumps to mind again, because my sort of world is crime fiction. The trope around what's a typical detective. If you know that it's going to be a detective story, usually the trope of the detective is a detective, male or female, who's obsessed with their work. They've got a poor family life. They're alcoholic. They're divorced, and they're not in contact with their children. They come home to an empty unit and they feed their cat, and they 23 hours a day they're on the job, and they're doing stakeouts, and so that's a trope relating to the character of a detective. It's kind of what readers expect. That and I'm often banging on saying, look, that's not accurate. Detective, even though that's how it's portrayed, that's kind of what readers expect. so you can still break the mold, but pushing that theme further, they're gonna expect dark themes. They're gonna expect there has to be a crime. There has to be, is it a cat and mouse type story where the detective is chasing, they know who the offender is, but they're just trying to catch them, or is it a whodunit? So is it we don't know who the killer is and we're trying to find out, and there's going to be a twist and a surprise at the end? Another trope is that even though there's a crime, there's usually some sinister bad guy. And what's the backstory of the bad guy or bad woman? The villain. Is there an anti-hero involved who is doing good things for bad reasons? And then there's got to be a climax. That crime's got to be solved at the end. If you don't solve your crime, you leave your readers guessing, well, you haven't met the tropes of a typical crime fiction. So they're just some examples that I can think of.
Amazing. Yeah, creates a satisfying reading experience.
Yes.
How can you tell he's been sort of swatting up for his masters that he's starting to embarking on soon?
Are you embarking on a master's, Jack?
Yes, I'm starting full-time study this year.
In what?
It's a creative writing. It's through University of Queensland. It's a writing, editing, and publishing masters, which I start in about a month.
You lucky duck. That should be amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying. I'm just going in there as a blank canvas, and you don't know what you don't know. So I'm looking forward to just immersing myself and learning new stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. I would love to now talk a little bit about self-publishing and how, if you can just tell readers kind of how long you've been in the game and how you've seen it change in Australia over time.
Who wants to start?
Harry.
Yeah.
Thankfully, all of my books are self-published. So I haven't gone through the traditional, and that's mainly due to my impatience. I tell a lie. I did publish a book many, many years ago in 2000, and that was a non-fiction coffee table book about the Turks and Caicos Islands, and there was about, it was about a 200-page book published through Macmillan. So I have gone through the traditional process, and I was screwed over royally in the traditional process. And so as a result of that, possibly I've sort of mentally gone, I may just want to see how it go. I may have mentioned, well, I've certainly mentioned it on our podcast. One of my short stories won a adaptable. I was on the Queensland Writers' Centre adaptable, where you go to sort of it's supposed to be the Gold Coast Film Festival, but it was cancelled because it was COVID. And anyway, had a studio online who were interested for about 5-6 months, and then eventually they said, "Oh, we think it would be better suited for a book rather than TV or a movie." And so I was like, I can't wait go through the whole process again. And so I just went, well, screw it. I've got this book already ready to roll. This is the first one, which was Dead Regular, which was a murder mystery. And I just went, right, I'm just going to polish this up and I'll have a go through the self-publishing route. And
never looked back.
Well, luckily I'm a technophile, so I love working out new software. I love working out and using software and the like. And also I've got several years prior to working as a paramedic. I was a graphic designer and I was working for myself in graphic design. So that does help a bit when you come to cover designs and book layouts and all of that sort of stuff. So that really does sort of add to your abilities to be a self-published author. And I'm also over the years, I started writing fiction in 2012. So Dead Regular started in 2012. I had the first draft done by 2014. It took me 2.5 years to write, and it got published in 2020. So it's a long process. It's a very, very long process. But over those years, I've learned to accept feedback and editing from other people and opinions from other people to make it a better product at the end of the day. And I think that's another thing that you've got to learn how to do, because it doesn't come naturally to people who tend to be, or to creatives, because they don't like being told something's crap.
Yeah, on the other hand, I think you have to learn also to trust yourself that it is your book and not to absorb every bit of feedback that comes along. So when you said you didn't have a good experience with the first publisher, was that because you didn't feel that you had control over the finished product, or it was just a very slow time frame or something?
I learned that you need to get a lawyer involved before a contract is signed, because the contract that came through had a little clause in the end of it, which basically said that the publisher could change whatever they wanted. And, you know, a lawyer would have picked that one up and gone, you can't have that. And so they made a lot of promises, especially with respect to money and what they were going to pay for and things like that. And then they went back on them all. And then somebody made a lot of money and we didn't. So.
Oh, that was like a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah. You got burnt. Yeah. Jack, what about you? Like when you published your first self-published book, and how you see it changing over time?
Yeah, I actually found it. I just thought I'd show you. This is the book that I first self-published, called The Angels Wept. And it's interesting. I've had people say that. Great cover. It's very powerful imagery, but feedback I was getting was it doesn't meet the conventions of a typical crime fiction novel in terms of the general look and feel of it. I actually went through the same sort of publishing company that Harry goes through for the production and printing, and it's traditional publishing quality. You know, it is.
Paradigm Print Media.
Media. Okay.
Brisbane, they're excellent. So I was kind of the same. I'd pitched to agents and publishers, and I was in a rush. I was still a serving police officer at the time. I had all these things I wanted to write about, and I wanted to get this book out, and I've been working on it for years. And in the end, I just lost patience. I didn't have the patience. I was getting the rejections, and I thought, bugger, I want this book out. And I guess my story is pretty similar to Harry's, and I ended up self-publishing it. I went on to write book 2 and book 3, and I had them kind of in, just there as manuscripts. But then I wrote this other one, which I've got a copy. It's called The Ghost Train and the Scarlet Moon. It's a historical mystery with a twist of time travel, completely different to what I'd written. It had nothing to do with crime. And I entered that into a competition, the Hawkeye Publishing Manuscript Development Prize, and came second. And as a result of that, I was offered a traditional publishing contract. And they published this book. And the publisher said, "So tell me about your crime fiction." I said, "Well, I've got this self-published book, but I've also got a book 2 and a book 3." And so the publisher took a risk and said, "Well, look, show me book 2 and book 3."
Yeah.
And then they ended up signing me for the whole 3-book series. And just to give an example, so this is the traditionally published version of The Angels Wept. You can see the different it's got a different look and feel about it. It's the same book, and it's been a bit more thoroughly edited and that sort of thing, but significantly different, you'd say, in terms of what the covers look like. So that was kind of my journey. So the publisher took me on, they re-signed me, and look, that doesn't happen very often. If you've self-published a book, generally a publisher won't touch it because it's already out there and they're not interested in it. So I think that's a bit of an anomaly. It's only because the fact that they'd already published my other book, which was unrelated, and I had a book 2 and a book 3, and I think they were happy that I had a pretty positive, proactive author profile. So they were happy to start again and actually republish my self-published book with some changes and with some editing, new cover, because they knew that there was still a book 2 and a book 3 to come. So I can kind of see it from both points. I like the idea of the freedom that the self-publishing gives you, the fact that there's so many tools available now for people to self-publish and to produce trade quality books. You got all the control. The only disclaimer I would make is I fell in the trap of just being too impatient. I probably should have invested in a professional editor. I think some self-published authors there's the pros and the cons, and one of the cons is that there is this perception that there's an oversaturation of poor quality self-published books because people are not investing in themselves in terms of professional book covers. You got to get your book covers professionally designed. Don't try and do it on Photoshop because it'll look like very amateurish and your books won't sell. And invest in beta readers and editors. Invest in yourself if you are going to self-publish. So I think if you're going to do it, don't kind of do it half-assed, do it properly. But there are certainly a lot of benefits in control. You're going to make more money per per book sale if you're self-published. But on the flip side is if you're with a publisher, you kind of feel like you've also got their support as well. So yeah, there's a lot there to unpack.
But you have a very happy marriage with your publisher, and your future books will be with your publisher.
Yeah, absolutely. So you feel like you've been, they talk about you're in a stable of authors, so there's yourself and there's a family of other authors that are with the same publisher, and you support each other with marketing and sharing each other's social media posts. And we come together for social events and development and different things. So yeah, it is nice to know that you're with, you have that person looking out for your interests, but again, you do have to relinquish some control as well.
Yeah, because it becomes a really collaborative venture. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I think with respect to being the self-published author, as I say, I've now got 4 books that I've self-published, 4 novels, and plus the collected tales, which is 32 short stories. And at the end of the day, I don't get the backup from a publisher, so I have to do everything. So I've got to chase festivals, I've got to chase potential options, opportunities to go places and things like that. Whereas if you've got a publisher there, they will have the inside knowledge and of when these sort of events are happening, and these do become very important in the whole marketing process. And so it is difficult, and I think the only way if you're going to go the self-published route, you want to get involved in certain things like what Jack and I have done is a podcast or other things which are going to raise your profile and provide you with that level of sort of somebody else to talk to and somebody else to bounce ideas off and stuff like that. Because it does become, if writing's very lonely, and if the whole process of producing a book is just you, it can get quite onerous, and and you really need to reach out and network and be able to sort of like make those links.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing is, Jack is so engaged with his publisher, and it's like an ongoing relationship. But if you get one deal and you're not, and let's say the book doesn't do as well as the publisher hopes, and there's not going to be any more deals coming your way, they kind of forget you, and they have new titles every month that they must focus on. So if that happens, then you don't have them championing you, and you can't really reach out to festivals without like getting a heads up that that's all right. So your hands are a little bit tied in that way.
Yeah.
So I see it as like over the long term, an author will still have the energy to champion themselves and to get a real buzz out of that. So it all just comes down to the relationship, I think.
Yeah. And I know authors that certainly my publisher won't just publish anything, So even though you might have published some books with them, they're always going to, every new book they're going to scrutinize. And if they're saying there's not a market for it, and I know I've heard of some really big name authors who have been with a particular publishing company, and the publisher has rejected them and said, look, even though you've written 6 bestsellers, this one is just not going to hit the market, or it's a dud. Give us something else. So there's no guarantees at all that your publisher is going to, once they've signed you for one, that they're going to publish everything we put out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be market driven. Now, the Genre Fiction Podcast, how many episodes do you think you guys have done, and have you got any favorite guests? Me?
Well, of course. Well, there was this last called Jess. I went and looked up before, 96 episodes at the moment.
Yeah.
96. And what we tend to do is because we ramble on and it's much more of a sort of long-winded chat and random stuff. I sort of add Jack likes is very sort of spreadsheet generated plan for what we're going to ask and things like that, and I just sort of like shoot from the hip, and so it tends to sort of like drag out for a long time. So often we've had interviews that have basically, because we aim at it around about half an hour for a podcast, we've had interviews that have ended up being 3 episodes. Have we done a 4 episode yet? I don't think so.
No, 3 is the most we've done.
3 is the most, and some of the 3 ones get a bit long as well, because but if we just start chatting and it's good information and it's enjoyable and we're chatting, sometimes you look at the clock and go, oh crap, we better stop.
I'm pretty
then-
sure we spoke for over 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Hours. Yeah.
And your episode's coming because even though we've got all these episodes already
In the
live,
back.
and
Yeah.
we've got about 4 months worth of episodes. We smashed out heaps and heaps of episodes before Christmas, and I think we've got something like 16 episodes still to come that we've already pre-recorded. So we've got about a 4-month lag time. But we've had some wonderful guests, as I said before. When it was myself and Harry and another author from Brisbane, Bryn Smith. He's he's no longer with us. He hasn't passed away. He's moved to Perth, which. He's kind of said you're dead to us now because he's moved to he's gone. But
Really, for God's sake.
Yeah. So the three of us got together and it kind of evolved, and it started off the first 20 episodes with just the three of us chatting, and we would literally we would.
Oh, no, I was drunk, but
we would literally start chatting about something, and we say, "Stop! Press record. We need to actually record this as an episode."
Yeah.
And that's about as much planning that went into. We would say we might have a sitting and do a couple of hours. We might smash out a few episodes, and we say, "How about we chat about this?" Righto, hit record, and away we went. And so it's just the three of us chewing the fat, and it really worked well because we all had different perspectives. And then when Bryn had to move, Harry and I really wanted to keep pushing on, so we thought, let's start getting guests on, and we've had some wonderful guests. What we do is we've kind of set our parameters are that we don't just get, we get plenty of authors contact us saying, I've got a book coming out. We get publicists who represent authors saying, my client's got a book coming out. Can they come on your podcast and talk about your book? And we kind of will say, yes, no, we're happy to talk to you and about your inspirations for your book, but what else can you offer? Our podcast is about offering advice to potential writers and readers. So what we say is that we have industry experts in writing and publishing, screen, television, we've had screenwriters and a whole range of experts. We say, what's your point of difference and what advice can you, what are topics that you can talk about as an expert? So you're actually imparting advice and information to us and our listeners. And then we will also talk about your books indirectly and what inspired your writing and what's your backstory. But we'll actually say, what's the topic that you're going to introduce and you're going to tell us about? So that's kind of our point of difference, because look, there's a dime a dozen, 1,000 other podcasts where they bang out all these authors and they say, so tell me about your book. And the host hasn't read the book, that they don't have a chance to read the guest's books. And then the author, it's almost like a cookie cutter, pro-formatted list of questions. Tell us about your book. Tell us what inspired your story. What's your background? When is the book launch? And we wanted to be more than just tell us about your book. We didn't want to be one of those podcasts. So that we kind of hold true to that. So when we get approached by authors who say, can we come on your show? We say, yeah, we'd love to have you. What's your point of difference? Do you have a piece of expertise that you can talk about? We had, and usually there is, we had an author from America whose publicist contacted us about their book that was being launched soon. And I said, okay, what's your point of difference? And she said, well, I'm a scientist and I'm writing about true issues around mining and the impacts of the environment. And I fictionalize that into a story. So we said, great, let's talk about that. Yeah. So, when we really probe and say, what's your expertise and what can you talk about? If you don't know, go away and think about it and then come back to us with some dot points. And it really makes for some really great content.
Yeah. It's because it's useful, it's teachable, actionable. I think the word is that the listener can go away and improve something.
It's not just the listener, we do as well.
We
come away going, that was a great idea.
Yeah, I have a long list of people I would love to contact, and I have to stop myself sometimes, or I'll just get so far ahead, because it's an excellent way of getting to meet someone that you admire and getting to learn from them. Someone said it's like the best form of networking possible, because there's a good value exchange for the person who comes on. They get to be in front of another audience. So it's
Absolutely.
a win-win. Who does editing of these long episodes?
I tend to do the editing, although because as Harry will attest to, because I retired from the police a couple of years ago and I've been sort of working part-time and I've got more time at my leisure, whereas Harry's been up until recently has been working as a full-time frontline paramedic. So I've just kind of self-learnt editing and just using some software, and so I'm happy to, and I've got the time to do that. But what we both contribute,
I got to pick up the slack now that I've.
You got no excuses now. You're going to be on a boat as a man of leisure, so we'll share the work. No, it really works well. We both contribute, and it's just it's a happy marriage. I'm the planner, Harry's the pantser, and it just kind of it complements each other. Yeah,
it's really nice. Now, I did want to ask as a final question how you two met, because we have a paramedic and a detective. So you
before you answer that, Harry, before you answer that, I actually can't remember. I feel like I just feel like I've always known him.
Oh, that's lovely.
I always met across the
No, I think there was a story which Harry might know, but I'll let you answer that. But
basically, I had heard that there was a detective in Brisbane who was writing a story, and had been asking permissions and getting a sort of effectively permission from his bosses to be able to produce a book. And I then saw that Jack was publishing, or I think it was a self-publishing at that point. And so I contacted him saying, "Oh, I'm a paramedic, worried about what my bosses are going to say about my book's writing, because I write about a dysfunctional ambulance service. And although it's all fictional, the problem is that there is only one ambulance service in Brisbane, and so it could get me into trouble, or I thought it might get me into trouble." And anyway, I was wondering whether, he'd managed to achieve permissions and stuff like that. And then it turned out it wasn't him. So there is another detective in Brisbane who was apparently trying to write a book.
That's wild. And
we had arranged to meet for a coffee. And then from there, I think we met on another couple of other networking things. And then, went on from there.
What about your pseudonym? Can you tell people how you manage that? Because we had a funny start to the call where you joined and it was your real name, so you quickly left and returned, and I will take that to my grave, what your real name is. Well, in the age of social media, you can run an account as a pseudonym, but is it a bit tricky? Like, how do you do stuff like LinkedIn and
it's tricky because, and this was something that I had early on. Obviously, when you're working as a paramedic and you're writing about a paramedic working in Brisbane, although the stories are fictional, the problem you're going to run into is potential conflict of interest, and somebody might sort of say, "Oh, I can recognize that," and get into trouble. My stuff's totally fictionalized. There's a kernel of truth to each of the stories, certainly the short stories, but they're so embellished and so changed that there isn't any conflict of interest whatsoever. However, my employers are a little bit sort of like a Colombian drug cartel with respect to their ability to forgive any transgressions. And so I was not happy putting my real name to those books, certainly at the start. But it did cause a lot of problems because all your social media, I just had a logo instead of photographs. And it was a HC and I'd done this little sort of Star of Life, but the staff was a pen and with a snake on it, there was a pen. And so I did all of this stuff, but I couldn't, I was saying, well, how am I going to sell these books? And they would be saying, oh, you've got to go and do talks, you got to do that and do this. And I'm going, but I can't show my face. And in the end, I won a competition, and they asked for my photograph for the competition, and it went up on the on the board, and went up on their website. And then the next thing was I'd signed up to do a talk at a library, and lo and behold, that same photograph came up on the library. And so now, for the last few years, if you Google Harry Colfer and just hit images, my photograph's basically the first one that comes up. So that was blown. So my pseudonym worked for a few years, but then, it blew. And then at that point, I didn't care, because by that time I was like at least 2 books and about 25 short stories into my publishing. And so I thought, well, if they really wanted to get at me, they've really lost the opportunity. But I stuck with because you put a lot of effort into the social media and the marketing and everything else, that changing your name back to your real name does cause a few issues. And so you may as well, once you've established something, sometimes it's easier. I'm currently looking at branching out to write other things other than to do with paramedics. And I'm wondering whether to change to my real name then, but I don't know. There is a funny story which we've mentioned on the podcast, is that I won twice on an award, and the third, I'd heard on the grapevine that Harry Colfer wasn't going to win 3 years in a row, so I submitted one in my real name. I won. They now have a Harry Colfer clause on their website saying you are not allowed to win more than twice.
That's hilarious. You hear of authors, in the US especially, who have multiple pen names.
Yeah.
I think it's really brave to just say, okay, now these books will be under my new pen name. Did you?
I think that's to do with genres, though, because different genres, they'll have a different name for each. Because basically, I went to a talk once, and this guy who wrote effectively shapeshifter porn, which is very niche genre. He didn't, he also wrote other things, and so he didn't want that name on that genre associated with the other books. And so he had loads of different names. Yeah.
So were you in a situation early on where you were leading a double life, Harry, where you were going to work and then coming home and writing books that you didn't tell your colleagues about?
Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, for the first few years, I was very cagey about it.
Yeah.
A couple of years, I was very cagey.
You didn't want to lose your job or your books.
I mean, I have to say, the first short story I published was 2016 under Harry Colfer, and I was drip feeding those to see what the reaction was, and by the time I published Dead Regular in 2020, a lot of the road staff knew who Harry Colfer was, but most of the management didn't.
Yeah.
I was happy with that situation.
Yeah, management being the last to know. How did you come up with your pseudonym?
It was actually my I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was my mum who came up with it. She basically pointed out that both my grandfathers were Harry, and apparently I should have been called Harry. I did sort of point out that she named me, so that's a bit of a weird thing to say. And Colfer is my grandmother's maiden name on my father's side, and so she was Irish, and Colfer is quite a obscure Irish name, and it made it really easy to get a domain name for it and all of the social media stuff. So
yeah,
I know when there was only one guy who's a cardiologist in America called Harry Colfer.
This is why I love being a muddit. It's an awful name, but it's great if you're a journalist with a line.
Yeah.
I mean, you both have amazing names for, like Jack, Roney. To me, you just sound like you write thrillers.
And I was in the same boat as Harry. I was a serving police officer when I self-published my first crime novel, and I was very concerned about conflict of interest and also perceptions of my work colleagues. And I did it very much incognito. I was very secretive about it, and I almost felt embarrassed about letting people know that I was writing crime fiction as a serving. I was an operational police detective at the time, and I thought people would think I was a bit of a knob writing crime fiction. I was actually doing the job. As it turned out, those fears were unfounded because my colleagues were very supportive when they did find out. But I kind of had to come out of the closet, so to speak, and I did that when I took some long service leave, and that's when I first published my book. And I actually did a course at the Queensland Writers Centre, and I got mentored with an author, and I was given advice around the pros and cons of writing under a pen name. So Jack Roney came from, my father's name was Jack and my mother's maiden name was Roney. So someone said to me, what's your father's first name, your mother's maiden name? I went, Jack Roney. My real name is a bit of a mouthful, and it sort of sits on the cover quite nicely. So I made a commitment early that I'm going to create this author profile under this name, and built everything, social media, website, when I do public speaking, everything. Everyone calls me Jack, which gets a bit weird. My wife kind of refers to me in third person. What's Jack want for dinner? I have to almost turn, what do you want, Jack? So sometimes it can get to be.
It was a pseudonym. Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was a pseudonym. I thought it was your real name.
No. And so as I get to know people, they learn my real name, and they think, we had no idea that Jack's not your real name. And so I sometimes will say, look, call me whatever. But if I go to a writers' conference and I've had to pay my ticket and I get my name tag and it's got my real name on it, people going, how come you got that name on you, Jack? What are you doing? And so they kind of realize that it's not my real name. So it does get confusing. There are definitely pros and cons. It does give you that element of privacy and that sort of thing. But in terms of publicity, you still got to be prepared to ultimately put your face out there and do public speaking, and I'm open about it. I just say to people, look, Jack's a pseudonym. Here's my reasons, because I was a police officer. I was concerned about conflict of interest and privacy, so I chose to do that. And I know other authors, like romance authors, who might be a primary school teacher and they write erotica or romance. And there's a lot of authors out there that do it for very valid reasons, but it does definitely come with pros and cons. Only today I had to fill out some paperwork for a consignment order for a bookshop. So anything that's financial related has to be under my own name. Yes. And then so you kind of got to manage your business affairs under your own name, but it's pretty normal in the industry. So
I mean, look, Mark Twain was a pseudonym, so we're in good company.
And George Orwell was Eric Blair.
Yeah. Samuel Langhorne Clemens. You wonder why he went with Mark Twain, don't you? That's pretty obvious.
Off the tongue in the same.
You wouldn't be able to put that on the cover and then get the actual title on there.
Yeah, fascinating. Wow. I mean, it must have created some hilarious miscommunications or quirky situations that sound like it would be a good book.
We have had instances where, Jack's introduced himself as Harry Colfer once, and on the
twice,
and and we've had guests calling us by real names, and we just just ignore it and carry on going, and so.
That's the magic of it. You can edit that out later, but you've only got to see our bloopers reels.
I mean, it's better not to know, and I feel like you'll always be Jack and Harry to me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine.
Because you haven't crossed the threshold where I know your real name. So
I have to say though, like Harry said, I have been tempted for future books that I may or may not write to maybe do it under my real name, because there's nothing nicer for keepsake is to have your name on a book cover. So I don't know yet, but at the moment I've dug myself pretty deep into this Jack Roney gig and this profile. So I know my publisher said just keep with it. That's what people know you as, and just stick with that profile. You've done all your marketing, everything. But who knows? I might write something completely different and different genre and decide to go with my real name. Maybe when I write the next erotica romance, so I might do it under my real name. We'll wait and see.
See, this is why, I mean, I have been married and divorced, but I would never in a billion years have changed my name. I was a journalist. I couldn't have imagined just erasing all my bylines of my, it amazes me that women will change their name and their identity. And then, you get a divorce and you got to change it back, which is very sad and annoying. But yeah, you just, for professional reasons, it's, it's something I spend all my life building my identity that I can't imagine having the strength to start afresh. But, wow. Well, that conversation took an interesting turn I wasn't expecting.
Well, like onions, we peel back the layers. We're getting very deep. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. That was really a really entertaining episode.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. It's been a pleasure. It's so fun when we don't have to worry about, we can just do whatever. We're just the guests. We're not the hosts, so it's good fun.
I know what you mean. Well, no one has to clean up at the end. Right? So thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Jess.
Bye now.